Welcome back. My name is Dr. Tim Brown. Again, I'm the Director of Interprofessional Education at the University of Georgia's College of Pharmacy. In our second sessions with Doctors Bland, Jones, and Chastain, we're going to talk about the therapeutic options that are out there to manage COVID-19, what we're using in the hospital, and also what you can use over the counter or maybe not use over the counter depending on your symptoms and what you're going through. We heard the FDA cleared hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin for stockpile emergency use. I know you've been rounding, and I know Albany's been in the news a great deal. Are you seeing those medications being used?
Currently, we have been. We've been using a combination of hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin for about 5 days, and that's somewhat limited to how many or how much we are able to get from a stock perspective. And so hopefully with this expanding stockpile, we'll be able to get access to more medications.
Exactly what is hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, and why are we using it?
Yeah, both drugs have been out and FDA approved for a long time, but not as antivirals. Hydroxychloroquine is actually an anti-malarial drug originally FDA approved, but most of its use is devoted to rheumatologic diseases. So things like rheumatoid arthritis, some other rheumatologic diseases that are out there. Whereas azithromycin is an antibiotic. It's used for a lot of respiratory tract infections. And so while there has been, some reports of using this, most of that data that's available, quite honestly, is low in numbers and lacks scientific, rigor is the best way to say it. Most of these studies are very small in number, no control group to really compare these drugs against somebody else. And they really lack in outcomes as far as the things we care about, that is, hospitalizations and ultimately mortality and death. And so, Bruce, do you have anything to add to that as far as what you think, what you've seen?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to both Dr. Chastain and Dr. Bland there. We think of hydroxychloroquine, so it goes by the brand name Plaquenil. Azithromycin goes by the brand name both Zithromax, or a lot of us know it as a Z-Pak, all right? So whether it's politicians or media or social media, there's been a lot put out there about, these drugs might be the one-touch cure. So we're starting to see a lot of hoarding. We're starting to see issues with shortages. And, two sides of that. One is that there are these drugs are drugs that are used by people chronically that need these drugs, and we don't want to take away from that. And also to this point, there is no human data to strongly support their use. So, we're seeing information that patients are looking into using it if they've been exposed as what we call prophylaxis. We've seen some patients with milder symptoms being used. And I think for us, we are really trying to save this for our sicker patients who are in the hospital, who are on ventilators, who, there might be some kind of benefit for using. And, the thing to remember is these drugs, they don't come without side effects. So I think we have to be wary of that.
That's a great question. I think, you talked about the sicker patients. What if I'm a high-risk patient? What if I'm someone that we've talked about in the past that we've been identifying as kind of high risk? Could you have a conversation with your primary care about using these, the word prophylactically or preventively? Is that being done? And if so, I think the proper process will be you need to call your primary care physician. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's probably fair. For us, we're not giving it all for prophylaxis. We've actually moved to restricting our use in our institution, just trying to make sure the right patients get it and that we're able to control, what is becoming a smaller and smaller supply.
Yeah, because I read an article the other day about the prescriptions that have gone up dramatically for these two drugs, and the prescriptions aren't just for 30 pills or 20 pills. It's like 400 pills, and there are pharmacists across the state who are not filling those prescriptions because they're afraid that they'll exhaust the amount that we have for those who really truly need it at this point in time. Because right now, this is the only thing we really have on the front line, correct? That we know that may have an impact from the limited information that we have. And so saving it for the sicker folks makes common sense. But I guess what I'm looking at with you guys, have you been able to have access to this for all your patients at this point that are considered inpatient or sicker? Does the hospital have a good supply of this? Are you sort of waiting for it to arrive? What's going on when it comes to getting it to the actual hospitals?
So for me, I think the word good supply is optimistic at best. I think it's more of a hit and miss type of, we have some today, it'll last us for a number of days, and then hopefully within that time frame, we should be able to get more in.
Wow. So it's important to really stress to the community that this is not a drug you want to hoard or keep just in case, that there are people who really do need this right now. I think production's increasing as well for those in the community that know what's going on. But listening to these three experts, you can sort of see how the focus is moving. I guess that brings me to the next question. This morning, I woke up to the news that one of the major drug companies is really kind of talking about a vaccine. So while we talk about these drugs that are out there and, using it for the sick people, preventively or prophylactically, we all get the flu vaccine every year. Well, I guess I shouldn't say all of us, but the majority are encouraged to get it. Is this kind of like that? Are we looking at a vaccine coming out in the near future? And what do you guys know about that? I'll open that up for discussion from anyone who has an opinion.
I would say a lot of times things come out in the press that's to give hope and optimism. I do think we will work towards a vaccine, but to say that it is anytime soon is, I think, optimistic at best. Based on some of the experts I've talked to as far as that know vaccines and do vaccine development within UGA, like Dr. Pegan, one of our faculty, I mean, you're probably looking at 2 years at best. And so anything quicker than that would be incredible. But to think that this is not going to be available during, this season and this pandemic, I think this is more looking towards the future about a vaccine, a long-term solution for this particular COVID-19 virus. But it's not something for this year. I'll let the other guys comment.
I'd jump in. I'm not optimistic that it happens this year, but I am optimistic that we will get one. Two benefits that this has over other vaccines that we've made are, one is interest, with it being a global pandemic. So a lot of people, probably with a lot of power, are going to help this get through. And the other thing, with infectious disease, when you're trying to enroll patients and really look at them or evaluate them or put them in a trial, sometimes it's hard to find that disease states to enroll patients. For the bad of it and the good of it, we're not having that problem with this. So that's two reasons I think to be optimistic. But in terms of a time frame, I think it's going to be longer rather than shorter.
I think the other thing to add is that there's some possibility that this SARS-CoV-2, this coronavirus, doesn't mutate as much as, say, influenza does. And so it'll be much easier to make a vaccine that will last for much more long-term rather than this yearly process that we undergo with the flu.
Well, it'd be interesting. The company I mentioned they're going to start a clinical trial and they're hoping to have it available for the 2021 spring. And I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but it was an interesting discussion this morning from their CEO. So I guess that leaves us the other question. I think you guys may not know this, but looking at natural products and that's out there, I hear a lot of community pharmacists talk about folks coming in to talk about and request kind of like the natural products, if you will. I always joke about this because people don't think they're medications, but I consider herbs and natural products to be just like any other medication, and they deserve the respect. But zinc and vitamin C and echinacea, do they have an impact here? It's one of the questions that I know that my aunt called me the other night and asked me that question of, can I take some echinacea to sort of keep this thing away? And honestly, I didn't really know what to say to her because the data is not there. But since you guys work in infectious disease every day, you're on the front line, I was wondering if you guys had opinions about using those kinds of products, in particular zinc. I think people use zinc a great deal, the vitamin C, and of course echinacea, which is the one everybody sort of leads to whenever we're in the middle of flu and cold season. Dr. Jones, you have a comment?
I think for me, there are a lot of herbal supplements that are out there. We all get a lot of questions, especially pharmacists. That's just a very common question we get about a lot of disease states. For me, you mentioned three specific ones: vitamin C, zinc sulfate, and echinacea. I'll go straight to the point. There is no data that supports their use specifically in COVID-19. If you look at vitamin C, we've got some good data for use in the common cold. And there's even some trials currently going on in China looking at the intravenous formulation. But to this point, no results with that. Zinc sulfate, we know, helps very well with colds as well. And it actually has activity against some of the other coronaviruses, but no known activity to this point against COVID-19. And finally, echinacea, very similar. No efficacy to show to this point. So, if these are things that are out there, things that you're considering, especially if you don't know exactly what it is, we got to still remember that we're in the midst of respiratory season and influenza is still out there. The common cold is still out there. But if it's specifically talking about use for COVID-19, I don't think the data supports.
Really good point. I think the other thing to tell folks is when you're looking at these three products, don't start anything without talking to your primary care physician first, because some of these could have drug interactions and problems as well. And then also to your point, Dr. Jones, they don't come without their side effects. Even though they're considered herbs, they still have side effects. Thank you, gentlemen. That concludes session number 2 with the infectious disease pharmacist in the front line. They've talked about therapeutic modalities today and what we can use over the counter or what maybe we shouldn't use over the counter. Session 3 will actually talk about comorbid conditions or chronic disease states such as diabetes and high blood pressure. I want to thank Doctors Bland, Chastain, and Jones once again for spending time with us today. Stay tuned for session 3.